It looked to me like Donald Trump on the debate question, and we'll move on to other things that might be more pertinent. I do think Donald Trump will debate. I'll be interested to know whether you agree with me. But he is working the refs right now, right? He's trying to say this is unfair. ABC is a place where they don't like me. He is in a lawsuit with ABC, isn't he, Gary? It's sort of odd that he ends up there.
Yeah, well, I guess the lawsuit is specifically directed at George Stephanopoulos.
Right.
I don't try to keep those deals, but apparently that's what that's about. I don't know if that's going anywhere. Certainly, I don't think there's going to be much noise about it prior to the election. As far as the debate goes, Mark, here's where we are with that. Of course, the ABC September 10th debate has been agreed to, but here's the rub. Interestingly, Trump had already agreed to the same parameters they had with CNN, and apparently the Biden team had as well. But when the Harris team came in, they have issued a fully different set of parameters. For example, remember what a big deal it was to the Biden team to have the mics muted when the time allotted for a candidate had expired. And the Biden team insisted upon that. And the Harris team now does not want that. They want mics open the entire time. Secondly, remember, they agreed on standing at the podiums. Okay, that was something that Trump said, we got to do it. We're gonna do it. Okay, the Harris team wants to be seated. Thirdly, there was never any opening statements. And typically, opening statements have become sort of blasés. Most people find them absolutely useless because they're nothing but recitations of campaign talking points. And I tend to agree with that. I don't think opening or even closing statements are generally very useful to voters. But the Harris team has now insisted that there be an opening statement. And finally, remember, there was not to be any notes. There was to be a pen and a notepad and a bottle of water literally on the podium. Now, the Harris team has insisted, no, we need to ensure that both candidates have notes. So that's the facts as reported today, Mark. And whether both sides can agree on these four different parameters and maybe others, I don't know. I do think there is going to be a debate. What that's going to look like, yet to be determined.
Well, that was a very good summary of indeed what they've done, which is open the patient back up and decided to kind of move some stuff around potentially. They do feel like they're, as you've just sort of hinted when you say, I do think there'll be a debate, it does feel as though they're negotiating toward yes, right? Both parties have an interest in this happening.
Oh, yeah. I think it's absolutely not likely at this point that there won't be a debate. Why is that? Because if you're ahead by 10 points, of course, you've seen this all the time in politics, Mark. You don't debate, period. End of story. I don't care who the other side is, whether it's Mickey Mouse or anybody. You're not going to do it because you don't want to risk a misstep. That's politics 101. I don't agree with that in terms of being beneficial to voters, but that is standard politics. The fact that this thing is now essentially a dead heat in most people's minds, there will be a debate. I can't imagine there not being one. Neither side wants to. It's that old thing about just like the same thing with the federal budgets. You don't look like you were the one that caused the problem, right? So there's going to be a debate. There's probably going to be some back and forth. Where they're going to end up on these four parameters I talked about and maybe others, who knows? But I think clearly at this point, the Trump people have said, look, enough is enough. You insisted the same network, the same date. Now you want to change the parameters? No.
Georgia is not really in play for the Democrats, I don't think yet, Gary Dietrich, but you can tell me how it's possible that there might be something in Georgia for the Democrats. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. I mean, the bottom line is the Harris campaign certainly wants everybody, including the Trump campaign, to believe that they are seriously contesting Georgia, and perhaps they are. Their rationale for that, of course, is what happened in these last couple of election cycles, right? And so they say, well, look what happened in 2020, we ended up winning Georgia. So, all the polling up until now, well, certainly when Biden was in, I mean, he was way behind in Georgia. Even now, Harris is behind, though by not nearly as much. So, and part of this, Mark, becomes the old political head fake. How much of this is an attempt to, quote unquote, in the modern parlance, expand the map? Well, but not exactly, not really, right? But we want you to think we're expanding the map because we'd love for you to dump $10 million there rather than in Pennsylvania, So it's hard to know sometimes exactly the internals on this for each campaign. I mean, I think that the Harris people are at least going to make a play, at least in these first few weeks post convention. Everybody does this. They'll be reading the tea leaves in these individual battleground state polls every day, if not by at the end of every week. And they will be making, as we call it, resource allocation decisions accordingly.
Well, I think that's a really great point that you're making, and it's one that escaped me, which is even if the Democrats feel as though they don't have a chance to win there, spending time there forces the other side to allocate, as you said, some of those assets and that money to media buys, et cetera, to essentially shore up that which they already should win. But again, everything is sort of in play. The latest poll tracker from 538 for Georgia puts Trump 0.6% ahead of Harris, with Harris on 46% and Trump at 46.6. So that's, right in the middle of the margin of error.
Right.
And so it suggests, anyway, that polling that, it's a little bit wide open. Lindsey Graham said, if we don't win Georgia, I don't see how we get to 270. He said that this weekend on one of the chat shows. I do believe Georgia's ours to lose, he said. It's really hard for Harris to tell Georgians that we're on the right track.
Yeah, well, and Lindsey Graham, by the way, is going to be actually campaigning for Trump in Georgia, his neighboring state, for that very reason. And, the thing about it is that Georgia has been seen as one of these states that sort of used to be written off, but now is considered potentially very purple. In other words, could go either way. And, when it comes to resource allocation, remember, it's not just money. An important component of that is candidate time. How much time are you going to devote to Trump being there, Vance being there, surrogates being there? Because that's a really big deal. Where you have rallies is typically the states that you believe are really the ones that are in play. Because there's nothing more scarce than a campaign. Anybody like me who's worked on campaigns from legislative to presidential, yeah, there's money, yeah, there's volunteers, yeah, there's all that. The single most important asset you have is candidate time. And so that face-to-face in a state, if you're going to hold a 20, 30,000 person rally and then therefore garner all the local media, as you know, Mark, that's what happens at those things. All the Georgia TV stations come in. That's what you're after.
We had a candidate, and we're going to check back in with him in October. We had a candidate for congressional office representing the 7th seat in Georgia. They've redrawn those maps. So originally he went 6th district to 7th district. It's one of those situations. But we were talking quite openly about the real problem Georgia has with disenfranchising voters. And when it comes to the vote in Georgia, their history is troubled, right, Gary?
Well, you don't have to go any further back than the last presidential election cycle to talk about. Georgia's going to be one of those states that is clearly under the microscope for how they conduct their election, who actually, votes. I can guarantee you right now, both the Biden/Harris team, now those lawyers and that staff and all have been transferred over, and the Trump team, they already have lawyers dispatched, man. Remember that next month, early voting starts in a lot of places. September, early October, there's going to be people casting ballots. So this isn't just a matter of the old poll watching on election day, November 5th. How these ballots get turned in, how they get tabulated, the so-called ballot harvesting, it's taken on negative connotations, but it simply means, hey, can I help you, Ms. Smith, get your ballot turned in? Remember to sign the back of the envelope, all that. All that's going to be scrutinized heavily, Mark. Yes, in Georgia, and frankly, in every one of the main 7 or so battleground states.
They have this Georgia State Election Board, and the idea somehow in Georgia, now this is also a template for other red states. Again, this is widely reported. There are essentially investigations going on around right-wing backed election activists who are already they're already setting the table for not certifying the vote. We touch on this, and we're going to touch on it again, Gary, so I hope you don't get tired of it. The idea somehow that by not certifying, you muddy the water sufficiently that the that neither candidate gets to 270. And when that happens, a whole list of other things happen that give the Republicans the upper hand. Again, the reason why I mention it in the context of Georgia is sort of head of the parade on this.
Yeah, I will be honest with you, Mark. I think, could the waters get muddied? Yes. I mean, let's go back to the old school days. If people remember things called hanging chads, okay, there are no more hanging chads to speak of, right? I mean, remember that? I mean, I'm just saying, and even in that case, just in Florida, people don't know. Go ahead and look it up. 500 some votes, hanging chads. Okay, with the old punch card ballots and stuff like that. The thing about it these days is, I think that the appetite, especially in the judicial system and, amongst others, to have things, quote unquote, monkeyed around with and drug out and throw it to the House, because I think that's going to be on a short leash. I mean, the courts know this kind of stuff is coming. I truly have confidence that at the state level and the federal level, many of these law clerks are already drafting up procedures for this. How do we process these cases? How do we do it timely? Because ultimately, Mark, this is the bottom line. There are 50 separate elections conducted in the 50 different states. They are required, as you know, to turn in their electoral college vote. I believe that will happen. I believe somebody will get to 270, unless we get that proverbial 259. Now we got to do this. Let's not get into that now, okay? But I do think that we're going to see it. I do think there could be some monkeying around, but I would doubt that it holds things up to the point where, come February, we're trying to wait for, the smoke puff to come out of Congress like they do in the Vatican.
Well, that is the process to which Gary is referring, sort of obliquely. I mean, it's not it isn't. Maybe the smoke puff is all that's missing. It really is this bizarre dance that would involve a vote in the House, and the vote is predetermined because they're just more red states. But I like hearing that. You feel as though, despite all the pearl clutching that we're doing, I'm a pearl clutcher on this one myself, and all the widespread reporting and journalism being done around these certification boards and the fact that the fix is already in, that you still feel it will essentially be a legit election. If one county in one state does not certify their ballot, asked John Watson, does that mean the whole state cannot certify its vote?
Well, all the votes have to be counted. So yes, could an individual county hang up the process? Yes. I mean, we saw that this last time, right? But the bottom line is going to be this. At some level, at some point in time, it's going to be, okay, Mr. or Mrs. Your registrar in this county or Secretary of State, the jig is up. Either give us the data and the court's going to rule on this, or certify a vote. That's what's going to happen. I mean, eventually that will happen. And, I think, again, is there potential for people to, as you say, monkey around with things? Yes. But I really think now, having gone through this in as detailed a manner as we did 4 years ago, again, this is not going to surprise anybody. Even mark the legal arguments that will be presented. Those things have already been hashed out to a large degree. This is not going to be some, we got to figure what we're going to do for the next 5 years. I don't think that's going to be the case.
Well, there is a fleet of lawyers, as you suggested, on both sides, so that everything kind of is in place for the legal battle that will ensue. I really hope that there is a decisive enough victory, as you say, that one of the candidates gets to 270 and we're not sitting here with what could be, again, another unprecedented decision-making process on the part of the Supreme Court, Congress, etc. But I actually am buoyed by the fact that you feel as though it's going to go well. That does matter to me. You can find
Mark, I'll just say, can I say one more thing about that? I'm not exaggerating. I am sure the draft briefs are already stacked up and ready to go. I mean, they know they know about all this stuff. They know the legal arguments on both sides. I have utter confidence, seriously, that there's legal interns and there's law school students and there's junior assistants that have already done initial drafts for this stuff. So I just want to tell you, don't jump off the cliff yet, Mark. Wait to do that.
Oh, no, I absolutely agree. In fact, there's been reporting on that there is that fleet of attorneys on both sides. So, and they're brilliant minds on both sides. So, I hope when the dust settles, though, there won't have to be any cliff jumping. Gary Dietrich, you can find him across the CBS television stations doing political analysis. Also, I want to ask you, well, in our last minute here, I know I've got to wrap up, but RFK Jr. I think it's bizarre. He offered himself to Kamala Harris. He offers himself to Donald Trump. Trump's a buyer, and now he's all in for Trump. Give me a word about that.
Well, I think RFK, to be honest about it, I think this stems to me, Mark, a lot out of the same kinds of arguments that Bernie Sanders and his people made when he ran against Hillary Clinton. That the DNC had a fix in, and it was, they were all on Biden. They were not going to let him run fairly. I mean, even Colonel West today, another independent candidate, has said the DNC has been doing everything they can to keep him off ballots. So I believe this is going to be investigated, but I think this is the genesis of RFK's beef. Look, you DNC guys, you did everything you could to prevent my candidacy, not let me on a debate stage, not let me on ballots. And therefore, I won't call it a grudge, but I certainly think he wants his pound of flesh out of the DNC.
Well, I mean, you say that, and I think it's indisputable on Sanders, and I'm sure on these third-party candidates like RFK Jr. and Cornel West, and this kind of third-party candidate who was, I do believe, by the Democratic machine, held down. Just as on the Republican side, there was, hey, you're a Trump supporter or we will primary you, we will beat you, and your political career will end. So both parties, the machines exerted tremendous leverage. But that said, why do you offer your services to the machine, Kamala Harris, for a cabinet job in return for an endorsement, given what you've just said?
Yeah, I think that's the part that RFK is going to have to speak to in more detail. He has, and I won't take time to make his arguments for him, but that question is going to be asked in more detail. I think he's given some rationales for that. We don't know yet whether he was going into Harris to actually barter for a job or whether he was saying, look, these are my beefs, and if you don't address them and let me get a chance to really get to 270, right? Because he's just under that now in terms of the number of 21 states he's qualified in, then I will take this action. So I don't know what was in his mind or where he's going with this, but I can guarantee you he's going to be asked those questions a lot in the next few months.
And the thing that he talks about is Donald Trump cares about American children getting healthy, about the American public getting healthy, about the environment getting healthy. I'm thinking, sorry, with all due respect, he does? I haven't seen anything in the way of policy or even personal remarks on such a thing from Donald Trump. But I think my friends, and there are a couple of them very highly placed in the RFK Jr. thing, which is weird because I try not to, I did talk to them over the weekend after this, and I try not to interact too much because I really think that he's kind of stepped off the curb a bit. But they say, watch how he will bring change to the Trump administration, and he'll bring together the disparate political interests. That's what they're at least spinning this as of the moment. Those are people in RFK Jr.'s camp.
Well, I think the bottom line there is just like the Sanders people. They feel like, hey, you know what? You did us dirty. Everybody knows you did. Wasserman out of Florida, all the stuff.
Sure.
But I think at this juncture, the RFK people, your friends included, are hoping for what Sanders has gotten, which is basically a seat at the table inside the party to say, look, you got to listen to my things. You got to listen about health care. You got to listen about guaranteed increases in minimum wage. That's what the Sanders people feel like they got out of that whole exercise, was a seat at the table to push their top 3 or 4 agenda items.
That's a great take. Maybe that is indeed what he wants, is just a little agency in everything. Carrie Kennedy, who is the sister of RFK Jr., ripped her brother. Yeah. This is the quote. I'm outraged and disgusted by my brother's gaudy and obscene embrace of Donald Trump, and I completely get out and separate and disassociate myself from Robert Kennedy Jr. in this flagrant and inexplicable effort to desecrate and trample and set fire to my father's memory. Again, that's his sister, okay? Oh, the daughter of RFK, obviously.
What I thought was interesting about that is she has the same, it's called dysphonia, this voice condition that he does. So this is it sounds like it's a genetic thing.
Yeah, it was a weird and almost eerie thing to hear her speak. It's a similar issue or the same issue. I think this is the continuing with her quote, the stakes this November couldn't be higher, which is exactly why my whole family will be fighting so hard to re-elect Kamala Harris and Coach Waltz, who've been champions for values that my family has fought for years. Donald Trump is the polar opposite, she continued. He's a threat to most basic freedoms that are core to who we are as Americans. The right for women to control our bodies, the right to live in communities safe from gun violence, to love who you love. I think that Donald Trump is incredibly dangerous to us, she said. And I think what Bobby has done is anathema to everything. Not only what our family stands for, but what Bobby has given his life to. You know, he spent so many years out there, she says, working on protecting the environment. And that's the opposite of what Trump plans to do. That's what Kerry Kennedy said, and sadly, I think that's accurate. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.